Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do a lot of interesting things that are unfolding today. So Joe Biden expected to sign an immigration executive order that could effectively end asylum as we know it. So we'll talk about that, both the policy and the politics surrounding it. Meanwhile, his son is in court today facing gun charges, obviously an extraordinary development there. So we'll take you inside the courtroom. Roaring Kitty is back, but many on Wall Street not very happy about it. And there also was a whole stock market meltdown situation yesterday, a lot going on there to get into. Fauci was grilled yesterday. We've got a great guest on to break down some of the highlights and lowlights there. The FBI actually doing something good for a change, raiding a corporate landlord over a major price-fixing scandal. This is something we've been covering for a while. You guys probably remember this algorithmic price-fixing situation. So this is related to that. We also have the very latest on that Biden ceasefire proposal and indications of who exactly may be standing in the way of ending that war and returning the hostages. We also have Ben Smith on. He's launching a new podcast focused on the media. We're going to talk to him about that and also about Vivek Ramaswamy taking a significant stake in BuzzFeed, where Ben used to work. So lots to get into today.
Yes, that's right, as Krystal said. Now, before we get to that, we just have almost everybody has actually made it across to local. So thank you to all of our premium subscribers. We have a couple of stragglers who are out there who have been asking why their Spotify playlist hasn't updated. It sounds like you haven't created your Locals account, so just go ahead and email support@locals.com to get yourself squared away. As we said previously, we have a link to the Spotify show in the email of every show, as well as all of the other places that you're able to access the premium show. Everything is additive, folks, so don't worry about that. We will get you squared away. Just support@locals.com, and you can sign up to become a premium subscriber at breakingpoints.com. So we really appreciate you. As Krystal said, though, some major news. President Biden expected this morning to sign an executive order on immigration. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. The Wall Street Journal broke the news just yesterday, so we're going to go ahead and read some of the details. The details are pretty interesting. The executive order, quote, would ban migrants who cross the southern border illegally from claiming asylum. It is a last resort effort to quell voter discontent with his handling of immigration ahead of the presidential election. So the details of the plan itself are expected to close the southern border after 2,500 migrants have crossed per day. This is similar to some of the policies that were proposed in the previous bipartisan immigration bill that we'll all recall that fell apart. Now, the interesting part here is some of both the politics and the policy. Immigration remains at the top of the polls for voter concern in some of the latest Gallup and Pew research, which we'll get to in a little bit. And it also validates, I'm curious what you think, Krystal. There was a ton of criticism at the time. A lot of Republicans said, we don't need to sign this bill because the president can just do it unilaterally. President Biden said, no, I can't do it unilaterally. And now effectively validating that concern and saying, no, I can do it unilaterally. So anyway, there's, at the very least, he certainly undercut many of the things that he said in the past. I don't think there's any mistaking that this is very obviously a political move and not in response to any sort of policy change or, some well-considered process there. Also, of course, comes on the heels of this new presidential election in Mexico. Ryan Grimm, by the way, will be doing a lot of segments about that, but I want to get your reaction specifically to that part because that does seem to be the most controversial part of this decision here.
Yeah, on those pieces, you and I definitely agree. It is a decision that comes directly out of political calculation and also, I would say, political cowardice. It is unlikely to survive legal scrutiny. And you can only imagine, not only is he a hypocrite because 5 seconds ago he was saying he can't do this on his own. And then he's like, by the way, I'm going to do this on my own. To which, there actually was some truth to what he was saying before because on a practical level, they don't have the money to implement this executive order. So I'm opposed to it on moral grounds, but even if you support it, it's not like they're going to magically be able to snap their fingers and have enough enforcement capability and enough deportation capability to be able to actually implement the executive order. So on practical grounds, it fails. In my opinion, on moral grounds, it fails. On legal grounds, Trump tried to do something very similar, and it was struck down in the courts. In that article from the Wall Street Journal, they even indicate Biden's own aides know that it is likely illegal and unlikely to survive legal scrutiny. But they're doing it as a political ploy anyway. And as we've just discussed before, and I think you agree with me, I think it's a political failure as well. Because if your goal is to win over people whose number one issue is I want more hardline immigration policy, like, you're never going to convince them that you're going to be more cruel and heartless and aggressive and hawkish towards the border than Donald Trump. And we'll show this later. I've mentioned this study a few times, but they did a bunch of research on there. Joe Biden is far from the first sort of like center-left liberal politician to try to make similar hardline immigration moves. And there was a comprehensive study done of similar moves that were done by European leaders. And they found that they didn't win over any of the immigration hardliners, and they demoralized their own base. So, I think it's foolish. You can only imagine the freakout from Democrats that would be occurring right now if it was Donald Trump implementing this order. I think it's illegal. I don't even think they can implement it. So to me, it's just a mess all the way around.
Yeah, you're very right. It is very unlikely to survive legal scrutiny. President Trump tried this several times when he was in office. This is part of the issue with much of our immigration law. I mean, I do support the ideas in principle. I've long think our asylum system is incredibly stupid, and that most of these people are just economic migrants in particular. But as you said, this is a political move. I mean, the truth is that if you really believed in this so-called cap, then why have you been doing it for 3 years straight? And there's some 8 million people who have come here illegally and just under the Biden administration. That's not my numbers. That's according to the Biden administration's Department of Homeland Security in terms of what that looks like with a multi-year backlog in terms of any of these people ever even possibly getting to asylum court and what the hell that deportation process even looks like if that were to ever occur. Now, to reference the polls that you talked about, let's put this up there on the screen because this is the actual reason that this is all happening. The New York Times did a comprehensive review of all of the polling around immigration. And it shows that the current system is deeply unsustainable to a previous status quo where Americans both broadly supported comprehensive immigration reform and positive net migration with a largely upward trend direction. What they find, though, actually is, quote, more recent surveys have found that the number of people who believe immigration is generally beneficial to the country's culture and economic growth has eroded from the recent high. A small but growing minority of Americans are increasingly concerned about its impact on drugs, crime, taxes, and national identity. For example, on April 30th, they found that for the third straight month, most Americans cite immigration as the most important problem facing the United States, and that is the longest stretch that the issue is top of the survey in 24 years of Gallup history. Next, if we look actually, a Pew study in February found that 70% of Republicans described the challenges at the southern border as a crisis, with just 22% of Democrats. Another poll found last year that 73% of Republicans want immigration to be decreased, so that is a supermajority of the Republican Party. But largely, things are trending in a very different direction from where they were previously. Now, that's not to say, though, that some of the status quo does not remain. For years, a plurality of American voters still say that they want a compromise with lawmakers and equal priority to providing legal pathways to citizenship for undocumented, or they say undocumented immigrants, for the country, as well as border security and strong law enforcement measures. So there is, kind of a general consensus about what some sort of grand bargain would look like. But of course, nobody really trusts each other. The Democrats largely want comprehensive immigration reform first, maybe some border security later. The Republicans are like, no, we want the border security, the deportation, the security now, and then maybe comprehensive immigration reform later. That's largely been the major sticking point also about who gets comprehensive immigration reform, who qualifies, whether it's previous people who are here. We could go on this all day. What we can, at the very least, say is the hypocrisy of the Biden administration being flagged, Krystal, as you referenced, by a lot of leftists. Let's put this up there. After years of decrying Trump-era immigration policy, Biden is actually exploiting the same section of U.S. Code 212F that Trump used for the so-called Muslim ban, and now to do the Hispanic migrant ban. The order will announce we will use the Section 212F of the Immigration Nationality Act to dramatically limit the migrant ability to seek asylum at the southern border once encounters reach a new threshold. Administrations have discussed 4,000 daily border crossings over the course of a week as the metric. And given just the numbers, I believe the validated numbers from the Department of Homeland Security just a couple of days ago was over 5,000, not in a week, in a single day, then that would obviously result in an immediate closure. So there's quite a bit of crow that's happening, I think, for the Biden administration here, Krystal, as you said, because they decried this as like a crime against humanity, and they exploited it, and they raised all this money and, drug their foot. They reversed everything they possibly could. There's a new Time magazine piece out just this morning where President Biden says that one of his only mistakes on immigration is that he didn't rescind or that he didn't implement more humanitarian measures enough earlier when he was in office. And then at the very same time, he's basically recopying Trump administration policy on top of also actually funding more border, okay, he won't call it a wall, but border security that happens to translate to a wall along the border. So there's just a lot of doublespeak that's happening right now.
Yeah, when it was Trump, this was fascism. And now Biden's like, I can do fascism too. I mean, you remember he even went to the border and was like, hey, Trump, let's work together. How about we do your fascist border policy that 5 seconds ago I was decrying? And now here he is using the very same tactics, which again, have already been deemed illegal. I mean, asylum policy is written into American law and international law. And so to just sort of end it with an executive order, very unlikely to survive legal scrutiny. They know that. This is purely a political move, a foolish one at that, and exposes them as complete and utter hypocrites. I mean, to go back to the polling, there is no doubt about it that immigration has risen as a concern for American voters. And you and I don't even disagree that the current asylum process is broken, largely because what happens is you have people who have realized that, they can come across the border, they can claim asylum, and because the court system is so backlogged that it will likely be years before those claims are adjudicated. And you know what? The American people understand that too. That's why part of the polling that you referenced there, Saagar, you have 60%, including 40% of Republicans who say, hey, one thing that's obvious that we should do here is increase the number of immigration judges and staff members so that process can work more effectively. You also have 56% of Americans who actually think we need more legal pathways to citizenship, which I agree with, because part of how you end up with, a chaotic situation at the border and so many people coming over illegally is when there are effectively no legal pathways to citizenship. So while Americans are mixed on immigration, their views are complicated, their views are ever changing, there is somewhat of a consensus out there in the public. But I wouldn't even say the problem between Democrats and Republicans is ideological. The problem on a lot of levels is political. Democrats, this last quote unquote bipartisan bill that was offered did not have any comprehensive immigration reform in it. It was all on the enforcement side. And Republicans wanted to keep it as an election issue, and Trump urged them to keep that as an election issue. So, it was blocked. I'm glad it's blocked because I didn't support it. I think there should be more pathways to citizenship. I think there should be an increase in legal immigration. You and I obviously starkly disagree on that. But on the politics of this, it's just a foolish move. It's an illegal move. It's an impractical move. It's not going to be effectively implemented. And it's also, as a leftist, I always note the fact that the Democrats and Biden in particular, so quick to completely turn on a dime and completely shift policy when the pressure is from the right. But when it's from the left, as in, is unconditional support for Israel, he will never, ever, ever change. And I think it's both comes from an ideological place. Joe Biden is, a conservative Democrat. You can look at his history throughout his many, many years in Washington, and you see that. And it's also just this instinct within the Democratic Party that came up in the Clinton era of always and forever, the right political move is to punch left. The right political move is to move to the right, move to the center. That's always their instinct no matter what. And so that's how you end up with a situation where you remember they were on the debate stage, speaking their high school Spanish and competing to say who could be more humane towards immigrants. And now, the minute that there's a little bit of political pressure, he just flips on a dime and is like, I'll be just like Donald Trump. Don't worry about it, guys.
Okay. As you said, we have multiple multi-hour debates about immigration that I think people can go and watch now.
Yes.
At this point, we're just going to quibble a little bit there about fascism, Krystal, because I don't think it's fascist to enforce the laws or to be concerned about the borders of your own country.
This isn't enforcing the laws. It's illegal.
Okay, well, that's, again, in terms of quote-unquote the law and how it's interpreted and enforced, as no president has actually enforced quote-unquote immigration law in the last 45 years, which, whatever. We can get to a very broader discussion about that and also about the merits of so-called legal immigration, especially the illegal immigration that is a part of this. I do think we can all at very least admit here that the politics of this for President Biden have been bad from day one, the images from the southern border, and in evidence that even this move now has come so far late for him. Let's put this on the screen because I found this fascinating. Even amidst his attempt to try and appear tough on the border, all of the swing state Democrats who are in tight races denied his request to appear next to him for this event. So I'm going to read everybody a list here. Senator Jon Tester, Tammy Baldwin, Jackie Rosen, and Bob Casey, all seeking re-election in battleground states, will not attend because, Krystal, of scheduling conflicts. You know, the calendar is a real bitch, isn't it? It's like he's got to meet with Bob Casey and all these other people, even though they are in town, just so everybody understands, they're here in Washington. They've got to meet with the Parkinson's delegation of Montana or some other fly-in delegation from elsewhere, and they don't have time, I'm sorry, for the President of the United States. That demonstrates to you, too, how toxic he actually is now. I think both on this issue, but more so how they are all running far ahead of him. Let's not forget, I mean, for example, in the state of Nevada, Jackie Rosen has got some 18-point swing between Donald Trump and between her support in the state. Jon Tester and Bob Casey are both running way ahead of Joe Biden, who I think by a margin, at least in the state of Pennsylvania, by 7 or 8 points. Tester is always an interesting case, but he remains at the very least a lot more popular than he is. So in every single case of the swing state Democrat, you have them absolutely shunning Joe Biden and rhetorically are likely going to be hitting him on this issue on the campaign trail like Mark Kelly did back in the midterm election. So there's a lot of lessons here, I think, on the Biden issue, but what we can see is that this is a last gasp at trying to hold on to the election. And at this point, I think the Sun Belt is gone for Joe Biden. His best case is to stop the bleeding amongst the white boomers in the blue wall, so-called old blue wall states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And what he's trying to do here is hold on to just another couple of percent that could possibly win him the White House and the absolute edge of the margin, because that's really the only way I think you can rationalize what's happening here.
Yeah, it would be convenient for me to try to make the point that I think these Senate Democrats realize that embracing Trump immigration policy is bad politics. But I think you're right that it's just about they see that Joe Biden is a toxic figure and they don't want to be at a photo op with him for this or any other issue. I don't think it's like a principled stand in favor of the previous positions that they staked down in favor of a humane immigration policy. But I've mentioned the study a bunch of times. I just want to put it up so people can see this research that was done in Europe. We can put this up on the screen. They looked at 8 different European countries. And again, they showed no evidence that shifting to the right on immigration helped these sort of like center-left figures, because immigration hardliners were already in whatever the right-wing party was in those states, just like here. Immigration hardliners are already in the Republican Party. The Democrats have a variety of coalitional issues at this point, and certainly those issues are not only coming from the left, but one of their coalitional issues is among progressives and young people and voters of color. And this does nothing to make those voters feel more affection for Joe Biden. So, on net, I don't think it helps him. Probably doesn't hurt him either, but I don't think that this is like the political magic trick that they seem to think it is, so much so that they're willing to, even though they know that it's going to be struck down and is illegal, willing to go forward with it nonetheless. And the other thing I would say is there is a risk, because part of successful campaigning is defining the issue landscape on which you're running. So the more that the political conversation is about abortion, the worse landscape that is for Republicans. And it really doesn't matter what Donald Trump says or what issue position he puts it, out, or if he was in office, what executive order he signed. That's just a bad landscape for Republicans. The more Democrats are talking about the need for a more restrictive immigration policy, the more they're talking about immigration in general, the worse footing they are on for this election. So to the extent that signing this executive order and doing this whole big push focuses the conversation on what is probably Joe Biden's worst issue set, I do think it is deleterious to him politically, sort of no matter what the policy ultimately is.
I agree, absolutely. Israel and immigration are his two worst. I think immigration might be slightly worse, but Israel is also up there. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.